All right, good morning, high rollers. Good morning. Thank you for being here today. Thank you, General Burks. Thank you, Colonel Hammonds. Thank you, 152nd Airlift Wing Airmen in attendance. My name is Emerson Marcus. I am the Nevada National Guard's Command Historian. I'm also the Public Affairs Officer here at the base. I am pleased to welcome you all to this event for POW MIA Recognition Day. In 1979, Congress passed a resolution for the creation of POW MIA Recognition Day to ensure Americans do everything they can to account for those who have not returned. About 2 weeks ago, Diana Brown of South Lake Tahoe asked me if she could speak here at the wing on POW MIA Remembrance Day, or Recognition Day. She expressed a great interest in being here and just talking to the airmen of the unit. Diana is the daughter of Nevada's only combat fatality, Lieutenant Frank Salazar, who lost his life in an air interdiction mission over North Korea in 1952. He was listed as missing in action for 2 years before the Air Force pronounced him deceased in 1954. Salazar was a member of the 192nd Fighter Squadron stationed at the old Army Air Base in Sept, Nevada, about 10 miles north of here. While Salazar did not return home, members of the Nevada Air National Guard did, and those airmen worked diligently to carry on Salazar's legacy here in Reno. It's a legacy that the airmen in this unit continue to carry on today. Diana Brown, thank you for being here today. On behalf of the 152nd Airlift Wing, Nevada Air National Guard, we're honored to have you here today. The podium is yours.
Good morning. Good morning, General Burks, Colonel Hammonds, high rollers, airmen, any family that may be here. Thank you for hosting me for this presentation, Freedom Isn't Free. It's a privilege and honor to be here with you on National POW MIA Recognition Day and the 40th anniversary of this day. To honor all POWs and MIAs and my father, First Lieutenant Frank Salazar, a member of your unit. Those who have served in a combat zone or know someone who has returned from deployment, including their families, clearly understand that freedom isn't free, that there is a sacrifice and price paid to protect our nation's freedom. I'm aware that the Guard, both Air and Army, currently have deployed members. Please know that my prayers are with you for their safe return. How many of you here know someone whose loved one went missing in action or was a POW still unaccounted for? Thank you. There aren't a lot of MIAs in Nevada, but there are 81. 70 from World War II, 5 from Korea, and 6 from Vietnam. Still, there are more than 7,800 unaccounted for from the Korean War, including my father. As a daughter of an MIA, I believe we families of POWs and MIAs have something valuable to contribute to our country. We understand that freedom isn't free. We understand what it means to live decades with unanswered questions, to grow up with not knowing what happened to our loved one, to wonder, to worry, to wake up and go to bed with our fears and hopes for our loved one's return. We know the pain of sacrificing our loved one for freedom's sake. That pain has been carved deep into our hearts and souls, and over time covered with scars, but still painful whenever touched. We don't forget our military today. We honor, respect, and are grateful for the risk they take to protect our freedom. We don't take our freedom for granted. In honor of my dad's legacy, I'd like to share a glimpse into my personal story. It wasn't until 2007 that I first met other families of POWs and MIAs. It was at the annual Cold War and Korean POW briefing in Washington, D.C. And there I learned about the DPAA, the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency. And I learned about their recovery and identification efforts. I refer to MIA as an ambiguous loss because there's no proof of death, no body to bury, and there's no closure. I learned that term ambiguous loss from Dr. Pauline Voss, who in the 1970s did research and worked with families of the Vietnam War MIA. An MIA loss is an unimaginable, complicated grief to live with daily and to heal. So it all began when I was 4 years old. I remember the drive to Travis Air Force Base. We left from my grandpa's house in San Jose. I remember my daddy holding me in his arms and kissing me goodbye at Travis. I remember his love for me, how he played and danced with me, how he taught me to draw, how he wrote letters to me from Korea, and I wrote letters back to him. I remember the delivery of the MIA telegram. I had just turned 5 years old the same month he went missing. I remember the tears and fearful look on my mother and grandmother's faces after Mom opened and read the telegram in a hushed tone. As young as I was, I knew something really bad had happened. And I sensed in my heart, in a child's heart, that it had something to do with my father. But I was too young to understand why my daddy never came home or why his letters stopped. Or why no one talked about him anymore. It was as if he had never existed. But I remembered him, and I missed him, and I couldn't make sense of it. In those days, there was no family support when there was a loss. There was no survivor outreach services, no tragedy assistance program for survivors. We were on our own, without our loved one, and without formal support from our Air Force family. Mom married again very quickly, her way to forget the pain and move on. Then a new man takes my father's place, but I know he's not my father. And I wonder, what happened to my father? Still, no one ever mentioned anything about my father. No photos of him were displayed for my younger brother and I to see or to remember him. When I was 10 years old, I was old enough to know how to ask the question. So I had a private moment with just my mom, and I asked her what happened to my dad. And she got really angry, and she said, "He's dead. That's all, he's just dead." The message I got was she didn't want to talk about him, and she didn't want me to ask questions about him. So my brother and I didn't. We didn't want to lose her love too. But at 16 years old, I got a little more bold, and I pressed her. And so I asked her, I said, do you have any photos of my dad? Because I don't remember what he looked like. And that for some reason, she didn't get angry. And she said, yeah. She says, I'll get them out after dinner. And so she brought out 2 photos. And one of the photos was my father in a P-51. And he had just come back from a trip to Vegas. And she says, she told me, this was taken here at the Nevada Air National Guard. She says it was this same kind of plane that he went missing in. And when she said that, I thought, but you said he was dead. And she says, well, she says they never found his plane and they never found him. But they, he's dead. But in my mind, he's not dead. Missing to me meant there's a chance maybe he's alive. If his plane, if he was able to bail out of the plane, if he, before it crashed, if he lived through a crash. So now I'm hanging on to hope for my father. So I spent years thinking about what happened to him. Did he live? Was he captured in a POW? Did he die? How did he die? All those questions go through my mind. Worst case scenarios, best case scenarios. And I lived like that for almost 45 years, feeling like I was derailed from living a happy life. How do you mourn a loss that no one seems to acknowledge? I had a deep sadness hidden inside me that no one knew. Even my younger brother and I never talked to each other about our father. We didn't know for decades that we shared the same sadness about our dad. But in 1998, the Nevada Air National Guard, you here, had your 50th anniversary. And our family was invited. And the 50th anniversary commemorative book was dedicated to my father. That changed my life. Now someone remembered and honored my father. The Nevada Air National Guard opened the door for our family to heal after almost 50 years. It was clear to my brother and I that his life mattered to his unit, not just to us. It was hurtful to my brother and me that our mother didn't keep his memory alive for us, his children. And I was angry at her most of my life for basically not honoring and remembering him and his service. There was no mention of him on Memorial Days, on Veterans Days, or even his birthday. But because of you, the Nevada Air National Guard, my brother and I were able to help each other heal. I don't believe my mother ever got over it. The start of my healing and my passion to know my dad and keep his legacy alive started with you. This MIA loss has a generational impact, going back to my father's father, who was a painting contractor. He lost his wife 2 years prior to the loss of my dad. With the loss of my dad, he never recovered to work a job again. It affected my dad's 2 brothers and sisters and their children. It's had an effect on my children because I was affected. It's had effect on nieces and nephews, on grandchildren. It hasn't ended. There is no closure for us unless my father's remains are recovered, identified, and brought home. Until then, we learn to carry the loss with us throughout life, never giving up hope to bring him home. Part of the price of freedom is fulfilling the obligation of a grateful nation to the families of the missing by continuing to find out what happened to their loved ones who served and made the ultimate sacrifice for their country. The first part of the obligation is to honor the remains, as was done in August 2018 in the Honorable Carry ceremony in Hawaii. When I was invited by Vice President Pence to accompany him to the Honorable Carry ceremony of 55 cases of returned Korean War remains at Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam, Honolulu, my hope was strengthened for all of us families of POWs and MIAs. And I feel supported by all of you here who took the time out of your busy schedules to attend this annual National POW MIA Recognition Day. Another part of fulfilling the obligation of a grateful nation is to continue the recovery and identification efforts, regardless of how long it takes. Our nation leaves no man or woman behind. Our government is fulfilling the obligation of recovery and identification efforts through the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, the DPAA. I had no idea that my government was searching for my missing father until I first attended that briefing where the DPAA talked about their efforts in 2007. It was there that I learned information about the recovery and identification of remains. I learned that during Operation Glory in 1954, more than 3,000 American remains were returned by North Korea. 848 of those remains could not be identified and were buried in the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific in Honolulu, known as the Punch Bowl. Others were added later as unknowns. To my surprise, one of the unknowns was interred in the Tomb of the Unknown at Arlington National Cemetery. And then from 1990 to 1994, North Korea exhumed and returned 208 boxes of remains. And between July of 1996 and May of 2005, 33 joint field activities, JFAs they're referred to, were conducted in North Korea, and they recovered more than 220 sets of remains, which are currently being processed for identification. Then on May 25th, 2005, the U.S. temporarily suspended joint field operations in North Korea, and they have not yet resumed. As for last year's return of 55 cases of remains, 32 have been identified. The identifications in the fiscal year of 2019 are 196. 123 from World War II, 67 from the Korean War, 0 from the Cold War, and 6 from the Vietnam War. There's been increasing advancement in forensic research and science that is being applied at the DPAA labs. Just to summarize, prior to the last few years, mitochondrial DNA, which is passed down from the mother, chest x-rays, and dental charts were mainly used to identify the physical remains. Now, 2 new means of identification have been added, or at least this is what I learned this last August. First, now they are taking nuclear DNA. And so I've contributed my DNA because my DNA has my father's DNA. And not only my DNA, but now they're taking nuclear DNA from extended paternal sides, such as my father's nephews and grandsons. So my brother's sons and my father's brother's sons have also contributed their DNA to the data bank. DNA is used to both identify and exclude identification. That means DNA could either identify my father or exclude my father, and in turn help identify another POW MIA. The second new forensic science that's been added has to do with using certain dietary and water compounds contained in the remains of a POW MIA. And these come from the diet and water that they consumed in their youth. They still remain in the bones. This information helps identify the probable country of birth, as well as the probable region of that country. For example, separating out the identities of South Korean from United Nations forces, or differentiating regions of countries by the locale of water consumption. So the water in New York State would be different from the water consumed in LA. Because of the recent successes with identifications, remains are being disinterred. That means honorably taken out of the ground and transported to the lab in stages. From the punch bowl, all those remains that weren't identified back in 1954 are now being taken out in stages and transported to the labs for identification. So for me, I wonder, is my father among any of those remains already returned and not yet identified? Maybe, maybe not. Another unanswered question for me. And I wonder, will I live long enough to get an answer? If not, subsequent generations promise to carry the torch for me, to bring my father home. So a price that's being paid for freedom is maybe never knowing and passing the obligation on to subsequent generations. The chance for future joint field activities happening in North Korea looks slim. The obligation of a grateful nation is to continue to press our nation's leadership, to continue funding and carrying forward the costly recovery and identification efforts. DPAA tells us family members that all the logistics for equipment, personnel, and finances are in place to resume joint field activity recovery efforts at the next weather opening, when and if there's an agreement between the U.S. and North Korea. Yet, as a MIA family member, at times I have felt like the POW MIA remains are pawns in a political game. I've had to learn to live with uncertainty in order to have my own peace of mind while dealing with this lack of closure. It's important to me that our government is making the effort to leave no man or woman behind. I want to know my father's life and service still matters to the leadership of my country, and it gives me hope for all families of POWs and MIAs. Even if my father's remains are not found, I can share in the joy of any family who finally has a fallen hero back home. Our POWs and MIAs took the risk and paid the ultimate price to protect freedom. No doubt they would have wanted to spare their families the pain of their loss. However, freedom isn't free. it's an ongoing emotional cost. In conclusion, on this National POW MIA Recognition Day, we do not forget them and we honor them. May God bless all of you who take the risk and serve to protect our nation's freedom. And I thank you for your support in attending today. God bless America.
Thank you, Diana. That was beautiful. I would like to welcome Colonel Hammonds to the stage right now for some remarks following that beautiful speech.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Diana. Today is a special day. Not only POW MIA Day, we just had the Air Force birthday this week. We get mired down in our day-to-day mission sometimes of fixing airplanes and launching airplanes and supporting our people, but this transcends our day-to-day mission. And I just want you to know how important it is that you're here today and how much it means to us as an organization. And your father's sacrifice carries on in our hearts, and we will carry that torch into the next generation. And a lot of the people that are sitting here today think about your father a lot, and I know I think about him a lot. He's a hero to the Nevada Air National Guard, and I just want to thank you for your father's sacrifice, and thank you for continuing to press to bring everyone home, and we don't forget that. Thank you, General Burks, for being in attendance today, and on behalf of General Berry, who unfortunately couldn't be here, the Adjutant General, if you want to come on up, I'd like to present you with a coin from him. And again, just thank you so much again for everything that you do, and you always have a home here, and you're always welcome anytime you want to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.